Thank you for coming tonight. I ski toured up a peak to prepare for this talk. Being out there really opens my heart and it puts my fear into perspective. When I was in my 20s, which was just a few years ago, I figured I had life all figured out. I had great friends, I had a supportive family, I had a recession-proof job teaching high school French, and I thought my motto was, you know, nothing would go wrong in my life as long as I didn't make any mistakes. So I worked hard at that. And it seemed like a pretty safe plan. And then I met Jim. And I followed Jim to places I wouldn't have gone to on my own. And clinging from rocks and half drowning in rapids and being in a tiny tent waiting out a storm, freezing. I no longer felt in control. And I felt like I had to rely on him. And it scared me, and I did not embrace these feelings. Sometimes I cried, sometimes I got angry at him and said, you know, this is so dangerous and irresponsible what we're doing out here. And I thought that being strong meant not making any mistakes, and I thought being strong meant not having to rely on anyone. And so it was hard for me. I thought being lovable meant being perfect. And so I said to him, well, we continued in the outdoors there, and he didn't leave me behind, and I kept following him. And in the wilderness, it had triggered a fear in me even greater than dying. It had triggered a fear that I didn't want him to see me weak. But then, after years of traveling together and of me crying and such, I could open myself to him and actually love him with all of my heart. And I realized I was learning survival skills out there, not just in the wilderness, but in life. We got married. And as Kevin said, 2 years after we were married, Jim was killed in an avalanche. And at that point, everything fell away for me. And I knew I would survive, but I wasn't sure how. I went to Alaska where he was killed. And my heart soared to be there, to be in his energy, but then crashed when we found his ice axe at the bottom of the cliff where he had fallen. And then I went to the Haida Gwaii and with friends, and we visited the totem poles, the mossy forests, and there is no greater blessing than a friend who is there when good times aren't. And I continued my pilgrimage to the Oat Route and skied there, and still looking for Jim, trying to honor what we had shared in the wilderness, and at the same time trying to get away from the pain that seemed to have squeezed my heart. But I didn't find Jim. And I also found that the pain was woven with my love that I had for him. I went back to Mount Kilimanjaro where the two of us had guided the year before. And I took this group of people who were raising money for Alzheimer's to the top. And helping them helped me to take my mind off of my own pain. And it gave me a sense of purpose. I was really inspired by these people who were courageous enough to face the unknown of this mountain. Many of them had never slept in a tent before, had never gone to altitude, and yet they were willing to put themselves in discomfort and perhaps risk failure in order to help other people. And that really gave me a big perspective on life and opened my heart. I guided another fundraising trip in Nepal, and again I was trying to create my old life, hanging on. I wanted to feel Jim out there. And I was following an old map, and I'd lost my compass bearing. They say that the stages of grief are similar to the stages of being lost in the wilderness. So you have your denial, and then anger, and then you bargain, and then you get depressed, and you finally accept. So I realized that I was following the wrong map, and I realized that I needed to create a new mental map. And Picasso said that the art of creation always begins with destroying something. And I needed to let go of what was already familiar to me and what was comfortable in order to create something new. And so just as I did in the wilderness, I needed to face my fears. The fear that Jim was dead, the fear that I was a widow. So, and Einstein said, look deep into nature and you will understand everything better. So I sat very still and I listened to my inner voice. and I decided I wasn't going to be a bitter old widow. I decided that I wanted to continue to live with an open heart. And I decided I would be brave and I would try something new. So I went to art school in France. And an author, Neil Gaiman, he said, when things go bad, make good art. Just like an oyster makes a pearl out of that irritating bit of sand. So that's what I tried to do. I believe everyone has some uniqueness to contribute to the world. But sometimes it takes walking through flame or fire or facing adversity to bring out that uniqueness. And for me, I am an artist, and I always have been. We built a hut in the Tantalus Range for Jim as well. And this creation helped me an awful lot to create a new life, really. And in this act of creation, creating the hut, and I wrote a book about my adventures with Jim and about my grief and my loss. And being absorbed in that creation allowed me to forget myself a little bit. I had an inner drive, but I was focused on other people. And it helped me to live again, to open my heart. And I realized that what was really important was to share my uniqueness with others. And after our hearts break, how do we love again? How do we open ourselves to loving again? And I think it takes a lot of patience, a lot of humility, and a lot of tenderness. But I realized that what defines me, what keeps me breathing, is how I'm connected to everyone in my life, like my husband Joe now, and our 8-year-old son Sam. I feel regular moments of bliss with these two, and sometimes I have to hold myself because I wonder how long will that joy last for. But I also realize that if we don't open ourselves up to the possibility of pain, we never will feel that joy. And I think in conclusion that we have to ask ourselves not just what is the risk of being vulnerable in life, what is the risk of being exposed, but more, what is the risk of not being vulnerable? What's the risk of not sharing our uniqueness to others in the world? What's the risk of not loving with all of our heart? Thanks very much.